So I'd said that 1968 is a crazy year in U.S. history for the assassinations, presidential campaign in Vietnam, the Tet Offensive, and then something else that happens is the My Lai Massacre. Way back at the beginning of the year, we talked about what a massacre means. Usually something that's one-sided, like one side dominates. Well, what's often been said about the My Lai massacre is where something dark and bloody took place. So the village of My Lai was expected to be a stronghold for the Viet Cong. For example, in 3 months prior to the My Lai massacre, 100 American troops had died without ever seeing any action. Like they died from booby traps or like sniper fire. So the Americans that are stationed near there are getting really frustrated, really angry, like outraged. And so one of the units called the Charlie Company, they dropped into My Lai and they only found like old men, women, children, like there's no signs of Viet Cong. So their Lieutenant William Cawley, orders them, and I quote, to mow down villagers. Think you know what mow down means. So the Charlie Company goes and shoots um, Vietnamese. The homes are grenaded. Even worse and much sadder is survivors had been raped. Some had been by U.S. soldiers, killed, dumped into drainage ditches where sometimes they were shot with machine guns. But during the massacre, an American, Hugh Thompson, he was a helicopter pilot. From above, he saw the bodies in the ditch and went down to investigate. And he ordered his helicopter crew to shoot any Americans who tried to stop him because he recognized that this wasn't right, something was wrong. And he was able to rescue a handful of children. His photographer had pictures of the event, but was ordered to turn over his film, which he did. However, they didn't know he actually had a second camera. And so there are pictures from the My Lai massacre, as you can see. Okay, so the members of the Charlie Company, they kept it a secret because they had realized like what they had done. But Ronald Ridenour, a veteran of the Charlie Company who wasn't there, he started to kind of piece together some rumors about what might have happened from some of his buddies. And so eventually he got enough of the story and he sent a letter to the president, President Nixon, and some key members of Congress, people at the State Department, at the Pentagon, to explain to them what had happened. And then he also gave the story to a reporter, Seymour Hersh, and that ended up going to the American public. Several of these officers that were involved were court-martialed. Most of them lost rank. Cawley was sentenced to life in prison, but Nixon ended up reducing it to house arrest. But what this My Lai massacre signifies is it showed Americans what happens when, some of these young American men were forced into what seemed to potentially be an unwinnable war. A situation where they felt like they weren't having many successes, and it put them in just kind of a tough position. You can see the statistic is the massacre of maybe over 500, probably around 560 Vietnamese that were slaughtered at this event. So this was just a dark, terrible event that happened in American history. And what it's going to lead to is it's going to lead to more protests. So in your notes, you have different types where protests would happen on college campuses, where professors would share and students about what was happening and why it was wrong. There were people burning their draft cards. You had the protest music, which there's a ton of protest music around Vietnam. You had protesting. This is actually a picture of my uncle, who he is a dove. He's against war at all costs. And here he was protesting all by himself when he was at community college in Rochester. And he ends up getting heckled by some people, and they eventually take his sign and rip it. But he was a hippie in the 1960s. He didn't believe against the war, and so his protest was just all by himself. But you also have mass protests, like if you've seen the movie Forrest Gump, like at the Washington Monument, that was an anti-Vietnam War protest.